In 2006, Stanford ecologist Rodolfo Dirzo set up a series of hidden cameras in the forests of California. Over the next 3 years, more than 15,000 photographs captured deer, foxes, bobcats, and other wildlife. But there was absolutely no sign of the species he was looking for. Then came 2020, during the largest wildfire in California's history. Amid the ashes, a resident unexpectedly discovered a lone mountain lion, exhausted and repeatedly lowering its head to lick its paws. After tranquilizing the animal with a dart and examining it closely, biologists finally saw just how horrific its ordeal had been. All 4 paws were severely burned, its body was covered in wounds, and large patches of fur had been scorched away. Veterinarians spent weeks treating and rehabilitating the mountain lion, providing it with the best possible living conditions. For the first time in history, a mountain lion received such extensive and careful human care. But for some reason, they did not breed this individual. Instead, they released it back into the wild. And once mountain lions returned to the forest, they did something completely different from what zoologists had expected. How could deer populations fall sharply even when the mountain lions were not hunting them? And what exactly did they do that caused wildfires to decrease so dramatically? It all began when people became determined to eliminate mountain lions because they believed the animals were killing livestock, competing with hunters, and reducing the deer herds people wanted to protect. California even paid bounties for every mountain lion killed. In total, 12,580 were killed, and to eliminate the remaining individuals, the state continued spending even more money to hire professional hunters. At first, the campaign appeared to be a success, but years later, people began to realize that this very action had triggered a series of other disasters. The forest did not die immediately. It remained green, coyotes continued to hunt, and bobcats still moved quietly through the landscape. But most importantly, with their predator gone, deer populations exploded. At the same time, young trees were stripped bare, while exposed soil and erosion became increasingly common. To find out whether deer were truly connected to these problems, Rodolfo Dirzo conducted an experiment. He selected 75 pairs of young trees from each oak species. 1 tree in each pair was protected, while the other was left accessible to deer. The result was not difficult to predict. The trees inside the enclosures grew much better, while those outside were eaten so heavily that they could not grow. And that was only the first impact of losing the forest's top predator. Once scientists understood just how important mountain lions were, they began searching for the individuals that remained, but for years they found almost nothing. In fact, they did not have to wait until 2020. 11 years earlier, 1 mountain lion had appeared in front of Rodolfo Dirzo's camera, only to disappear almost immediately. It was not until around 2012 that mountain lions began showing up more regularly, and in the years that followed, the cameras even captured kittens. Even though people could not see them, the mountain lions were still reproducing and gradually rebuilding their population. Mountain lions do not need to recover to their former numbers before they can begin influencing the forest again. The first change, of course, involves deer. At their current population level, pumas cannot and do not need to eat all of them. In fact, simply appearing regularly is enough to force deer to change their behavior. About 85% of puma activity takes place at night, causing nighttime activity among deer to drop by as much as 34%. Deer become more cautious, avoid dangerous areas, and no longer forage as freely as they once did. Fear causes them to move less and feed less in sensitive areas, which reduces the damage to young trees and allows vegetation to begin recovering. But while it is easy to understand how pumas can reduce the impact of deer, what exactly did they do that caused California's devastating wildfires to begin declining? By 2020, the story returned to the very same mountain lion you saw at the beginning. After surviving the bobcat fire with burns on all 4 paws, the female, known as Monrovia, was treated, rehabilitated, fitted with a satellite collar, and released back into Angeles National Forest in October. She became the first mountain lion in California to be rescued, rehabilitated, and returned to the wild through this program. During the first few months, everything seemed like a success beyond expectations. Monrovia established a home range of about 67 square miles, hunted and killed deer on her own, appeared healthy on camera, and was even seen traveling with a male mountain lion. For nearly 10 months, she lived in the area where forest and residential communities overlap without any conflict with people. But then, Around the 15th of August 2021, her GPS signal suddenly stopped moving. Biologists followed the signal into a deep canyon and found Monrovia dead. A field necropsy could not determine the cause of death. Just over a year later, California also lost P-22, the iconic mountain lion of Los Angeles, after suffering injuries consistent with a vehicle strike, along with several serious chronic health conditions. Tests also found that he had been exposed to 5 different rodenticides, but his death sparked the strongest wave of support for predator conservation in decades, and after that, a series of other mountain lions were released. In fact, before Monrovia died, a second mountain lion had already been returned to the wild. In February 2021, 2 female cubs, about 6 months old, were found near a golf course in Orange County after their mother was killed by a vehicle. One of them was taken to the Ramona Wildlife Center. For 4 months, people deliberately kept their distance because the goal was not only to restore her health, but also to keep her wild enough to remain afraid of humans. On the 21st of June 2021, at about 10 months old, she was released into the Santa Ana Mountains. CDFW viewed this as a pilot effort. Could an orphan puma be raised by humans and still learn how to survive on its own? By 2024, the experiment had gone even further. 2 mountain lion siblings were found beside an apartment complex near Coalinga when they were only about 4 months old. Their mother was never found. During 5 months at Sonoma County Wildlife Rescue, they were fed deer carcasses, game birds, and eventually live rabbits to develop their hunting skills while having almost no direct contact with humans. On the 6th of June 2024, both were fitted with tracking collars and released into the Diablo Range. Early data showed that they continued traveling together, an important survival strategy at an age when they normally would still have been following their mother. In June 2025, a young male that had been struck by a car, suffering a fractured skull, as well as head and eye injuries, also returned to the Santa Ana Mountains after 153 days of treatment. Just 3 months later, 2 more orphan cubs were released back into San Diego County after more than 5 months of learning to hunt and to stay away from people. Around the same time, the way people treated mountain lions had changed so dramatically that it was almost hard to imagine. A female, about 1 to 2 years old, wandered into a backyard in Redwood City. Police monitored her with a drone, and CDFW tranquilized her, but she was not killed. Because she was healthy and showed no aggression, she was fitted with a GPS collar and returned to the Santa Cruz Mountains the very next day. Now let's return to the question we care about most. What did mountain lions do to reduce wildfires? To answer that, first look beneath the feet of the deer. Scientists returned to vegetation plots at Jasper Ridge that had been surveyed in 2006, 2015, and 2023. What they found was hard to ignore. The density of woody plants increased by as much as about 64 times, while the number of woody plant species in the surveyed plots rose from just 2 to 18. Notably, some of the most common species were coast live oak, California sagebrush, and poison oak, the very plants that deer frequently browse on or trample. A chain of events began to emerge. Mountain lions appeared more frequently. Deer were forced to change where and when they foraged. Browsing pressure in some areas may have declined, and young plants that had once been repeatedly bitten down finally had a better chance to grow beyond the reach of deer. But this is where we have to be very careful. Stanford scientists describe the puma-deer vegetation connection as still being provisional evidence. They have not been able to completely rule out temperature, fog, and other environmental changes. In fact, over the same 17-year period, total plant cover actually declined by about 16%. And importantly, more plants do not automatically mean fewer fires. Wildfire risk depends on the type of vegetation, moisture levels, the amount of dry grass, fuel structure, weather, and how vegetation is distributed across the landscape. Jasper Ridge itself still maintains fuel breaks, mows grass, and uses sheep and goats to reduce combustible vegetation. But mountain lions also affect the forest through another pathway. One study in the Santa Cruz Mountains tracked 50 prey animals killed by pumas and recorded 14 scavenger species, making 819 visits to the carcasses. Vultures, ravens, coyotes, bobcats, and opossums took turns feeding on what remained before decomposers continued the process of returning nutrients to the soil. In other words, a mountain lion does not simply kill one deer. It changes the behavior of the deer that remain alive, provides food for other species, and helps redistribute nutrients across the landscape. Beyond P22, scientists are also seeing another problem. Mountain lions may be able to return, but the California they are returning to is no longer the California of a century ago. Mountain ranges that were once connected are now fragmented by homes and massive freeways. P22 was the clearest example. He crossed both I-405 and US 101, then became trapped in Griffith Park for more than a decade. He survived in the middle of Los Angeles, but he never found a mate and never produced offspring. For mountain lions, a freeway is not just a road, it is almost like a wall. The NPS has documented many individuals approaching the edge of a freeway and then turning back, while those bold enough to cross may be struck by vehicles. By early 2023 alone, 34 mountain lions in the NPS study area had been killed by vehicles since 2002. But those that do not die on the road face an even quieter threat. They become trapped among their own relatives. Reduced gene flow can lead to fathers mating with daughters and grandfathers with granddaughters. In 2020, biologists captured P81 with an unusually kinked, L-shaped tail and only one descended testicle, alarming signs of inbreeding. Later, a study of 5 males found that an average of up to 93% of their sperm was abnormal. And ironically, P81 himself was eventually killed by a vehicle. Even their food is no longer completely wild. CDFW tested 247 mountain lions and found that 96% had been exposed to at least one type of anticoagulant rodenticide, while 174 carried 3 or more. After P22 died, his body contained traces of 5 different anticoagulant rodenticides, although veterinarians confirmed that they were not the direct cause of death. He was also suffering from kidney disease, arthritis, a severe skin infection, and injuries consistent with being struck by a vehicle. California eventually realized a very simple truth. Banning the hunting of mountain lions is still not enough if they have nowhere to go. A young mountain lion leaving its mother must find a new territory. A male must be able to find a female, and populations must be able to exchange genes with one another. But US 101 has cut the Santa Monica Mountains off from the Simi Hills and Santa Susana Mountains, turning once connected landscapes into ecological islands. Research by the National Park Service shows that this fragmentation affects not only mountain lions, but also bobcats, coyotes, lizards, and even some bird species. Mountain lions in the Santa Monica Mountains, in particular, have some of the lowest genetic diversity in the western United States. That is why at Liberty Canyon, California chose a solution that would have been almost unimaginable a century ago, building an actual piece of forest across a freeway. The Wallis Annenberg Wildlife Crossing stretches across more than 10 lanes of US 101 with a total program cost of about $92 million. But this is not simply a concrete bridge. Its surface will be covered with nearly 1 acre of native vegetation and connected to more than 10 acres of restored habitat on both sides, including coastal sage scrub and oak savanna. Seeds, acorns, and even native fungi were collected in advance so that the vegetation on the bridge would carry the same biological fingerprint as the surrounding landscape. The goal is not to lure another P22 across the bridge so tourists can take pictures. The larger goal is to allow mountain lions to disperse freely, find mates, and carry new genes from one population to another. At the same time, bobcats, coyotes, deer, and countless smaller animals will regain a corridor that the freeway once severed. The project site was chosen at one of the last remaining sections of US 101, where protected habitat still exists on both sides of the freeway. As of August 2026, construction at Liberty Canyon is still being completed, and the crossing is expected to open to wildlife on the 2nd of December 2026. At the same time, California is gradually phasing out scars, the rodenticides that have exposed 92% of tested pumas to poisoning. Urban trials have shown that poisoning rates among predators fell from 92% to about 70% after only a few years of restrictions on their use. More than 820 square kilometers of wildlife corridors in Santa Cruz, Big Sur, and the San Gabriel Mountains are being expanded and reconnected. And the most controversial approach, but also one considered among the most biologically feasible, is a gene infusion program, introducing genes from healthier populations in Arizona or the Sierra Nevada, similar to what Florida did to rescue the Florida panther population in 1995. If successful, the program could increase genetic diversity by 20–40% within just 15 years. The story in California is not unique. In many parts of the United States, people remove predators before fully understanding everything those animals were quietly helping to keep in balance. And mountain lions have left behind remarkably similar lessons across landscapes separated by thousands of miles. At Zion National Park in Utah, as tourism and human activity increased sharply during the 1920s and 1930s, cougars gradually began avoiding Zion Canyon. Deer immediately took advantage of that absence. Their density increased from fewer than 4 animals per square kilometer in 1930 to nearly 30 per square kilometer by 1942. But the consequences did not stop with the deer. In nearby North Creek, where cougars remained common, cottonwood trees continued to grow and regenerate. The number of cottonwoods established after 1940 was as much as 47 times higher than in Zion Canyon. Along streams where cougars were still present, researchers also recorded more than 100 times as many amphibians, about 5 times as many butterflies, and roughly 3 times as many lizards. When streamside trees disappeared because of browsing, the soil along the banks also lost its anchors, and erosion increased sharply. A similar story emerged in Yosemite Valley. As cougars became rare in the early 20th century, mule deer increased dramatically, and new generations of California black oak began to disappear. In 2006, scientists examined 2,921 oak trees across 18 forest stands, accessible to deer, and found that recruitment had declined significantly beginning in the 1920s. By contrast, in areas where trees were protected from deer, oaks continued to regenerate. This is not simple proof that cougars create forests, but the pattern fits remarkably well with the same chain: predator, deer, young trees. In Florida, people learned a different lesson. Sometimes protecting a predator is not enough. You also have to save its gene flow. By 1995, only about 20–30 Florida panthers remained. Biologists decided to introduce 8 female pumas from Texas into the population. 5 of them reproduced and produced at least 20 kittens. By 2007, the population had grown to about 100 animals, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service later estimated that the population had recovered to more than 200. 3 places, 3 different stories, but the same lesson. A predator is not simply an animal sitting at the top of the food chain. It is a relationship. When humans break that relationship, the consequences can ripple from deer to trees, from trees down to stream banks, and then outward to dozens of other species. Mountain lions are not a perfect species. They still hunt deer, sometimes kill livestock and pets, very rarely attack people, and can even prey on endangered species such as bighorn sheep. But that is exactly what reveals an important truth. An ecosystem is not defined only by the number of species it contains, but by the relationships between them. When mountain lions disappeared, the forests were still green, deer were still alive, and the trees were still standing. But beneath the surface, those invisible relationships began to change. Deer became less cautious, smaller predators changed their behavior, carcasses disappeared, and the flow of nutrients through the ecosystem changed as well. Sometimes it takes humans decades to realize that what we lost was not just an animal, but a function of the entire ecosystem. California spent nearly a century removing mountain lions from the landscape, only to later learn how to live alongside them again. But today, after humans have spread across so much of the land that once belonged to these animals, do we truly want mountain lions to return? Or do we only want the ecological benefits they provide without accepting the cost of living alongside an apex predator? What do you think? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy stories about how nature restores itself, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And in the next video, we'll continue exploring a species that may seem useless, but can actually transform an entire ecosystem.